The Falcons were trailing by 6 with 2 minutes left on the clock when my daughter-in-law walked into the garage and told me dinner was ready. I didn't look up from the workbench. I was in the middle of fitting a mortise joint on a side table I'd been building for 3 weeks. My hands were covered in sawdust. The joint was almost perfect. "I heard you," I said. "We're eating now, Frank." Not Dad, not Pop, not even Mr. Calloway. Just Frank. The way you'd address a coworker you didn't particularly like. I set down the chisel. "Give me 5 minutes." She was already gone. I looked at the table. The grain of the walnut ran straight and clean under the shop light. Dorothy would have loved it. She always said walnut was the most honest wood there was. No tricks, no hiding. What you see is what you get. I turned off the radio, washed my hands in the utility sink, and went inside. By the time I reached the kitchen, my son Derek and his wife Brittany were already seated and halfway through their plates. Nobody had waited. Nobody had said grace. The chair I usually sat in had a stack of Brittany's mail on it. I moved it to the counter and sat down. Nobody acknowledged it. Nobody apologized. The television was on in the living room, some home improvement show. A cheerful couple arguing about backsplash tile. I ate my dinner in silence and told myself it wasn't worth mentioning. That was my first mistake. That was also not the beginning. Looking back now, I can see that clearly. The garage was just the moment I finally admitted something I'd been refusing to acknowledge for almost 7 months. People don't become invisible all at once. It happens the way rust does, slowly, quietly, one small thing at a time, until one day you look down and realize the damage runs deeper than you thought. If you've ever watched someone you love stop seeing you, you already know exactly what I mean. My name is Frank Calloway. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a finish carpenter in Charleston, South Carolina. I built furniture, installed custom millwork, and restored old houses that other people had given up on. I retired 2 years ago when the arthritis in my right hand made the fine detail work too unreliable. Dorothy passed 18 months before that, pancreatic cancer. 8 weeks from diagnosis to the end. The kind of timeline that doesn't give you room to prepare. It just takes. The house we'd shared for 27 years suddenly felt like a building I was just storing myself in. My son Derek had always been a good kid. Steady, responsible. He worked in logistics management for a distribution company in Savannah, about an hour and 40 minutes from Charleston. He and Brittany had been married 4 years. She worked in marketing, or had been working in marketing. She'd left her job about a year before they asked to move in. The ask came on a Sunday afternoon in March. I was on the back porch sanding a rocking chair I was restoring for a neighbor. Derek called and said the apartment lease was ending. The rent had gone up significantly, and things were tight without Brittany's income. "Just a few months," he said. 6 at the most, just until they stabilized. I told him yes before he finished the sentence. Truthfully, the quiet had gotten to me. Some mornings I'd walk into the kitchen and the stillness was so complete it felt physical, like something pressing against my chest. Dorothy used to hum when she made coffee. Didn't matter what song, just humming. I hadn't realized how much of the house lived in that sound until it stopped. So when Derek and Brittany arrived with their boxes and their noise and their shoes by the front door, I felt something I hadn't felt in a while. Like the house was inhabited again. The first 2 months were fine. The third was when the edges started showing. Little things. That's always how it starts. Nothing dramatic enough to address. Nothing serious enough to justify a conversation. Just small adjustments that added up. The first one was the workshop. I'd converted the third bedroom into a woodworking studio years earlier. Lumber storage along one wall, my lathe in the corner, a drafting table where I sketched out projects. Dorothy had always called it my thinking room. I spent more time in there than anywhere else in the house. One morning I walked in and found 3 of Brittany's moving boxes stacked against my lumber rack. A garment bag was hanging from the lathe handle. 2 pairs of shoes were lined up beside the door. I moved everything into the hallway. Brittany walked past an hour later, glanced at the pile, and said, "Oh, I was going to organize that stuff. I just needed somewhere temporary." "That room's my workshop," I said. I know. She waved a hand. "I'll figure it out." She didn't move the boxes for another week, and when she finally did, they ended up in the guest bathroom, blocking the cabinet under the sink. I didn't say anything. I told myself it wasn't worth the friction. The second thing was Dorothy's garden. She'd spent 15 years building it, nothing elaborate. raised beds along the south fence, a small herb section near the back steps, a climbing rose she'd been training up a cedar trellis since 2011. I'd maintained it since she passed, not because I had any particular gift for gardening, because it was hers, and keeping it alive felt like keeping something of her alive too. In April, I came home from a hardware run and found the herb section dug up. Brittany was kneeling in the dirt, transplanting what looked like ornamental grasses. "What happened to the herbs?" I asked. She sat back on her heels and shielded her eyes from the sun. "They were pretty scraggly. I thought something decorative would look better out here." I looked at the bare soil where Dorothy's rosemary and thyme had been. "Dorothy planted those," I said. Brittany tilted her head slightly. "I'm sorry?" "My wife. She planted those herbs." A pause. "Oh," another pause. I didn't realize they were special. I stood there for a moment. Then I nodded and went back inside. That was the second mistake. Every time I nodded and went back inside, I was teaching everyone in that house exactly how much I could be moved without pushing back. By May, Derek had started doing something that bothered me more than anything Brittany did. He'd started disappearing from conversations. Not physically, emotionally. Anytime I mentioned something that felt off, he'd tilt his head the way he used to when he was a teenager trying to avoid a disagreement. "Dad, she's just trying to make it feel more like home." "Dad, she doesn't mean anything by it." "Dad, can you just let it go this once?" I heard those phrases so many times they started blurring together. One evening I sat out in the workshop after everyone had gone to bed. The house was quiet. I ran my hand along the edge of the walnut side table, feeling where the joint was coming together. Dorothy had always said I worked best when I stopped thinking and let my hands remember what they already knew. I looked up at the wall above the drafting table. I kept a photograph there. Dorothy and me at Folly Beach, summer of 2015. She's laughing at something off camera. I'm looking at her like I can't quite believe she's real. "Well," I said quietly, "I'm starting to feel like a stranger in our house." She kept laughing in the photograph. The clearest warning sign came from my neighbor, Gus Patterson. He'd lived 2 doors down for over 20 years, knew Dorothy since before Derek was born. One Tuesday morning, he flagged me down while I was checking the mail. "Hey, Frank." He looked slightly uncomfortable. "Running into you saves me a call." "What's up?" "What's up? I was talking to your daughter-in-law at the pharmacy last week." He paused. She mentioned you'd been having some trouble managing on your own." I looked at him. "Trouble managing," I repeated. Gus put his hands up. "I'm just telling you what she said." I thanked him and went back inside. That evening I was walking past the kitchen when I heard Brittany on the phone. I wasn't trying to listen. The kitchen is 12 feet from the front hallway. "We're doing what we can," she was saying. "It's a lot, honestly. He needs a lot of support." I kept walking. I needed a lot of support. I owned that house outright. I'd paid off the mortgage 6 years before Dorothy got sick. The property tax, the homeowner's insurance, the utilities, all of it came from my account. I'd installed the kitchen cabinets myself. Built the back deck with Derek the summer he turned 17. I needed a lot of support. I went into the workshop and closed the door. I didn't come out until midnight. The thing that changed everything happened on a Wednesday morning in June. I was at my drafting table sketching out a blanket chest I'd been planning to build for Derek and Brittany as a housewarming gift when they eventually found a new place. I'd already selected the wood. White oak, solid and warm, the kind that gets better with age. My phone was on the table. I picked it up to check the weather and saw a Facebook notification. Someone had tagged me in a comment on the Charleston Community Buy-Sell group. I opened it. The post was Brittany's. She was selling Dorothy's writing desk. It was an antique secretary desk made of cherry wood, with a fold-down writing surface and 8 small interior drawers. Dorothy had inherited it from her grandmother. She'd used it every day of our marriage. She wrote letters at that desk, birthday cards, her journals, which I'd never read because they were hers. She'd always said that desk was the one piece of furniture in the house that was purely, completely, non-negotiably hers. The asking price was $350. I scrolled further, a matching side chair, a hand-stitched quilt Dorothy's mother had made, a decorative mirror from our bedroom that had hung in the same spot for 22 years, all listed. None of it hers to sell. I set the phone down on the drafting table. I didn't move for a long time. Not because I was too angry to think, because for the first time in 7 months, Everything I'd been half seeing suddenly came into focus all at once. And the picture it made was something I couldn't look away from. That weekend was the garage dinner. Brittany calling me Frank, the mail on my chair. Nobody waiting. Nobody apologizing. The next morning I woke up at 5:15. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, watching the sun come up over the rooftops along Meeting Street. Charleston mornings are something. The light comes in soft and low and turns everything gold for about 20 minutes before the day gets serious. I sat there with my coffee and thought clearly for the first time in months. Then I picked up my phone and called my attorney. Her name is Sandra Briggs. She's handled my affairs since Dorothy's estate. Practical, no nonsense, the kind of lawyer who tells you exactly what you need to hear even when it's uncomfortable. "Frank," she said, "I was wondering when you'd call." I told her everything. The workshop, the garden, the Facebook listings, Brittany's comment about me needing support. The conversation about managed living I'd overheard 3 weeks earlier that I hadn't mentioned to anyone. That one Sandra hadn't heard yet. "What do you mean, managed living?" she asked. About a month earlier, I'd woken up around 2 in the morning and gone to the kitchen for water. Brittany was in the living room, talking on the phone. The television was off. The house was quiet enough that I could hear her clearly from the hallway. "The house is really too big for him anyway," she'd been saying. "Honestly, one of those active senior communities would probably be better for everyone. He could make friends his own age." I'd stood in the hallway holding an empty glass. Friends his own age. I was 63. Sandra was quiet for a moment after I told her that. Then she said, "Frank, how long have you known me?" 9 years. "Have I ever told you that you were overreacting?" "No, I'm not going to start now." We talked for 40 minutes. By the end of the conversation, I had a plan. Not out of anger, out of clarity. There's a significant difference between those two things, and it took me 7 months to find it. I called Bobby Garza next. He runs a moving company out of North Charleston. I'd built custom shelving for his office about 5 years back. Good man, dependable. "Hey, Frank, what do you need?" I looked around the kitchen, at the cabinets I'd installed. At the window above the sink where Dorothy used to keep a small pot of basil on the sill. At the house I'd spent 27 years building into something that meant something. "I need your crew," I said. "Thursday morning, early." A pause. "How early?" 7. "We can do 7. What are we moving?" "Everything that's mine." Bobby's crew arrived at 7 sharp. 4 guys in green shirts with a box truck and a flatbed trailer. Bobby came himself, which I appreciated. He shook my hand at the door and took one look at my face. "You doing okay?" "I'll be better by noon." He nodded once. "Then let's get to work." Derek and Brittany had left for work at 8:15. Derek had kissed me on the cheek on his way out the door, which he hadn't done in months. It caught me off guard. "You seem like you're in a good mood," he said. "Just glad the day is here," I told him. He didn't ask what I meant. By 9:30, Bobby's crew had loaded my workshop completely. The lathe, the drafting table, the lumber rack, all of it. Every tool I'd accumulated over 31 years of finished carpentry. The work itself. I carried what I could. My back had opinions about that. Bobby's youngest guy, a kid named Theo who couldn't have been more than 22, took most of the heavy boxes without being asked. "You sure you don't want help with that?" he kept saying. "I'm sure," I kept saying. "Okay." He'd take it anyway. At some point, Bobby caught me standing in the workshop doorway, just looking at the empty room. "You all right?" "This room was her idea," I said. "Dorothy." She cleaned it out herself and said, "Frank, you need somewhere to think." This was 2009. Bobby was quiet for a moment. "Then it'll still be her idea wherever it ends up." That meant more than he probably knew. The hardest part was Dorothy's writing desk. Sandra had called Brittany that morning and informed her that the items listed on Facebook Marketplace were not hers to sell and that the listings needed to come down immediately. They had come down within 20 minutes. That told me everything I needed to know about what Brittany understood when she was finally faced with a direct consequence. The desk was still in the guest room where Dorothy had always kept it. Bobby's crew moved it with more care than I expected. Blankets, straps, slow and deliberate on the stairs. I followed them out to the truck and watched them secure it. Then I sat down on the porch steps. My eyes filled up. Not from sadness, because I was protecting something that deserved to be protected. Because Dorothy had trusted me to be the kind of man who didn't let her things, her real things, the pieces of her that were still present in that house, get sold off to strangers for $350. I wiped my eyes and went back inside. Bobby found me in the kitchen around noon, eating a sandwich I'd picked up from Husk on the way back from a hardware errand that morning, turkey and provolone. Nothing special. We're about wrapped up, he said. I looked around. The walls showed pale rectangles where pictures had hung. The living room felt hollow. The bedroom was stripped down to the furniture that had belonged to the house before Dorothy and I ever moved in. The place looks different, I said. Yeah, Bobby agreed. Honest. That was the right word. My phone rang at 5:47. I was sitting at my friend Lionel's kitchen table in Mount Pleasant. Lionel was a retired electrician I'd known since 1997. We'd fished together, coached Derek's Little League team together, buried our wives in the same year. He poured 2 glasses of sweet tea and sat across from me and didn't say a single unnecessary word. Derek's name appeared on my screen. I let it ring. It rang again and again. Lionel looked at his tea glass. Boy's persistent. Always was. By 6:30, there were 14 missed calls. Then a voicemail. I listened. Dad. Derek's voice sounded like he'd been standing for hours. Dad, where is everything? Where are your tools? Where is Mom's desk? A pause. Please call me. I set the phone face down. Lionel pushed a bowl of boiled peanuts toward me. He's going to call again, I said. I know. I don't know what to tell him yet. That's okay. Lionel cracked a peanut open. You don't have to know yet. At 7:15, I answered. Dad. The relief in Derek's voice lasted about half a second before the confusion took over. What happened? Where is everything? I moved my belongings. A long pause. What? Why? The question genuinely puzzled me. Not because it was unreasonable. Because he truly sounded like he didn't know the answer. As if the previous 7 months had been completely invisible to him. Derek, I said. Yeah. Do you remember Dorothy's writing desk? Silence. Facebook Marketplace, I said. $350. A longer silence. Then a sound I hadn't heard from my son in a very long time. Something between a breath and the beginning of a word that didn't make it out. I didn't know about that, he finally said. I know you didn't, I said. That's part of the problem. He didn't respond. We'll talk, I said. Not tonight. I hung up. Lionel was quiet for a moment. Then he refilled my tea without asking. You eaten anything real today? He asked. Sandwich. That's not real. He stood up. I've got leftover red rice and sausage from last night. That was Lionel. Never dramatic, never sentimental, just practical in the ways that actually matter. Sandra called the next morning with information that reframed everything I thought I already knew. I spoke with a contractor, she said. Her voice had that careful, precise quality she used when something was more serious than she wanted to lead with. What contractor? A man named Peters. He does renovation work over in West Ashley. A pause. He called me back yesterday afternoon. He remembered Brittany. I sat down. When? About 5 weeks ago. Before the garage incident. Before the Facebook listings. What was the meeting about? Sandra paused again. He said she reached out about renovation estimates. She told him she was planning some upgrades to the property. He assumed she was the owner or had the owner's permission. What upgrades? The pause this time was longer. She wanted to know what it would cost to convert your workshop into a home office, and to expand the primary bedroom by opening up the wall between it and the room next to it. I stared at the window. Frank, Sandra said, the room next to the primary is your room. I didn't speak for a moment. She was planning to take your bedroom. She was planning a renovation that assumed you no longer lived there, Sandra said. Whether that was conscious or not, that was the assumption built into every estimate she requested. I sat there holding the phone, not in anger, past anger, in something that felt very much like the moment you finally understand the full shape of a thing you've only been seeing pieces of. She hadn't been adjusting to the house. She'd been replacing me in it, gradually. The way you slowly rearrange a room, moving one piece at a time, until the original layout is gone and you can barely remember what it looked like before. Harold, Sandra said. Frank, I corrected her. A slight pause. Frank, you're not imagining this. I know, I said. And this time, I genuinely did. 2 days later, I agreed to a conversation. Not at the house, not at a restaurant. At Lionel's place, because it was neutral ground, and because Lionel had already refused to be excluded. "I'll sit in the kitchen," he said. "You won't even know I'm there." He lasted about 12 minutes before pulling his chair into the doorway. It was a small gathering. Sandra, Lionel, Derek, Brittany, and me. My neighbors, Gus and his wife Carol, came because Gus had been holding on to what Brittany told him at the pharmacy for weeks and felt it was relevant. He wasn't wrong. Nobody looked comfortable. Brittany looked the least comfortable of anyone. Sandra opened a folder. Contractor estimates. Emails. The Facebook listings with timestamps. A screenshot of a note Brittany had saved to her phone, found during a cloud backup issue she'd asked Derek to help her with the week before. The note was titled House Plan and contained a rough timeline. My workshop converted by fall. Primary suite expanded by winter. Derek stared at the papers. "You really did this," he said. It wasn't a question. Brittany looked at the table. "Britt." His voice was quiet, not angry, just worn through. "You told me those were passing ideas." She didn't answer. "You told me you were just thinking out loud." Carol Patterson leaned forward then. She'd been a school librarian for 30 years and had the particular gift of saying the necessary thing at the necessary moment. "Brittany," she said, "I've known Frank since before Derek was born. I watched him build that back deck. I watched him take care of Dorothy for 2 years when she was sick. I watched him mow that lawn in 90-degree heat 3 weeks after her funeral because he said she would have wanted it kept up." She folded her hands. "That man is not a burden that needs managing. He's a person who needed help for a few months and opened his home without hesitation." The room was quiet. Brittany's eyes filled up, and when she started to cry, it wasn't theatrical. It was small and embarrassed and real. "I was scared," she said. Nobody spoke. She pressed her fingers to her eyes. "We've never had anything that was actually ours. Every place we've lived, someone else owned it. Someone else could take it back." She exhaled. "And then we were here, and the house was paid for, and it was stable, and She stopped. "I stopped thinking about what it meant, whose it was. I stopped thinking about you." I looked at her for a long moment. "That's the thing," I said. "You didn't stop thinking about me. You started thinking about me as a problem to solve." She flinched. "There's a difference," I said. She nodded. "Once. Small." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a photograph. I set it on the coffee table. It was Derek at 17, standing on the back deck we'd built together. He was holding a cordless drill and grinning like he'd just discovered electricity. Dorothy was in the background with a glass of lemonade, watching us with that particular expression she had when she was proud of something and trying not to show it too obviously. Derek picked it up. His face changed. "I need to say something," I told him. "Not to her. To you." He looked up. "I didn't move my belongings because I was angry. I moved them because I'd spent 7 months quietly disappearing, and I finally decided to stop." I held his gaze. "But the part that hurt most wasn't Brittany. It was you. You standing in the kitchen that night while she talked to me the way she did. You telling me to let it go every time I tried to say something. You choosing quiet over honest." Derek set the photograph down. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in 3 days, which was probably accurate. "I know," he said. "I raised you to be a fair person," I said. "I don't know when you stopped being one." He flinched the same way Brittany had. That told me the words landed where they needed to. "I'm sorry, Dad." His voice broke on the last word. "Just slightly. Just enough. I'm sorry." He stood up and crossed the room and put his arms around me. Not a polite hug. The kind you only give when you mean it. I held on. Not because everything was resolved. It wasn't. Not because the damage was undone. It wasn't that either. But because he was still my son, and some things matter more than being right. When we sat back down, I looked at both of them. "You have 60 days, I said. "I'll help you find a place if you need it. But the house is mine. It was Dorothy's, and I'd like to live in it like it is." Neither of them argued. Brittany nodded. Then she said something I hadn't expected. "Is the desk okay? Dorothy's desk?" "It's in storage," I said. "It's fine." She nodded again. "Good." A pause. I didn't know what it meant. I should have asked. I should have asked before I touched anything. Yes, I said. You should have. That was the most honest exchange we'd had in 7 months, short as it was. 3 months later, I was in the workshop, which was now set up in the detached garage. Different space, same room in the ways that matter. The lathe hummed. The drafting table held a new sketch. Dorothy's desk was against the wall in the bedroom, exactly where it used to be. Her quilt was back on the cedar chest. The climbing rose on the back fence had survived. I'd replanted the herbs myself, rosemary and thyme, same spots. Derek came by on a Saturday morning. He and Brittany had found a small house to rent over in Avondale. I'd helped them carry boxes. It had been quiet between us, but not hostile. The kind of quiet that's actually honest and therefore more comfortable than most conversation. He knocked on the garage door. "Faucet in the bathroom is dripping again," he said. I looked up from the lathe. "I know. Want help?" I considered it. "I've got a second wrench." We spent 2 hours on the plumbing. He handed me tools when I asked. Sometimes he handed me the wrong one. I corrected him without making anything of it. At one point, he was under the sink and asked me to pass the channel lock pliers. I found them and set them in his hand. "Thanks, Dad." 2 words. Nothing special about them. Except they sounded like themselves again, without the weight they'd been carrying for most of a year. Later, sitting on the back deck with coffee, Derek looked at the rows climbing the cedar trellis. "You replanted the herbs," he said. "Your mother liked them there." He nodded slowly. "Do you think you'll ever stop doing things because of what she liked?" I thought about that. "No," I said. "I don't see any reason to." He smiled. "Just a little." That's a good answer. The deck boards were warm from the afternoon sun. The city made its usual low sounds around us. Somewhere down the block, somebody was mowing their lawn. I reached over and picked up my coffee cup. On the side, in black permanent marker, was a label I'd put there myself about 6 weeks earlier. Not because anyone had taken it, just because I finally understood that some things are worth marking clearly. It said, "Frank's," not a statement, not a fight, just a fact. And sometimes, if you say a fact plainly enough and long enough, the people around you eventually start to believe it too. If you've ever had to remind the people you love most that you're still a person and not just a fixture, then you know that the hardest boundary to hold is the one closest to home. But it's also the one most worth holding. Because the life you built doesn't stop belonging to you just because someone else got comfortable inside it. Sometimes the most important thing you can do for the people you love is refuse to disappear quietly. Frank didn't raise his voice, didn't burn anything down, he simply stopped shrinking. And in doing that, he gave his son the chance to find his way back. Holding your ground with dignity isn't coldness. It's the clearest kind of love there is, because it leaves the door open without pretending the hurt wasn't real. A small note for you, this story was created and fictionalized by AI, crafted to bring you a moment of meaningful entertainment while carrying a small, genuine lesson about self-worth and family worth holding on to.